Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
One of the great achievements that I imagine my wife probably gets credit for in parenting is that our kids now make their own lunches. It's a really, especially as a person who is mostly responsible for the early morning routine, it's a wonderful thing when your kid makes their own lunch. So Hannah, our eldest, 13, she's become very particular about her lunch, and she has this little, like, if you know what a bento box is, it's like a little, it's a little, I don't know, Tupperware piece with dividers already in it, everything has its place. And she not only likes for everything to have its place, she also likes for it to be very colorful, and certain colors have to go in certain places. It's not like a obsessive thing. It's just she likes it to be pretty. She makes her lunch every morning very early because they go to school very early, and then she'll look at it. She'll talk. I'll catch her sometimes talking to herself, and she'll say how pretty her lunch is. And there's a word that's popular among at least her age group today, which is, and they use it inappropriately, but they use it incorrectly. They like to say the word aesthetic. This is aesthetic, not aesthetically pleasing, not aesthetically appropriate, not.
Like a vibe.
It's like a, yeah. So she'll say, my lunch is aesthetic. And we'll be like, it drives us a little nuts, but it's what she says. But if we were to say that we like food, it's not surprising that we like food to look good. But we also know that just because food looks good doesn't mean it tastes any better, right? Food can look beautiful and not taste good, and food can look terrible, but be delicious. We know that the actual image of the food does not actually change the way it might change how we think about it, but it doesn't change, it might change whether we eat it or not, but it doesn't change the actual taste of the food. And if we were to apply this to human beings, we would absolutely say that this is not true, that just because a human being looks better does not mean they are a better person. That's hopefully obvious to everyone. And yet, the Torah portion this week is, as my daughter would say, about aesthetic. It's a story. Moses, we're in Tetzaveh. Moses is really accomplished, like, let's say 80% of his resume, right? Moses has been saved as a baby, become Pharaoh's, essentially nephew, famous right-hand man, then left all of the power and fame and wealth in order to go show compassion and lead the slaves, the Israelite slaves in Egypt. He's met God at the burning bush. He's climbed Sinai. He's gotten the 10 Commandments. He's done the 10 plagues. Like, he's done a lot. And then the Torah portion starts by saying, go get your brother Aaron and his sons, Va'asita bigdei kodesh la'aharon achicha, go get your brothers, and put upon them lechavod ultiferet, these clothes that are of honor and beauty. So normally when we read this Torah portion, we focus entirely on what's happening for Aaron and the brothers. There's an interesting commentary by Aviva Zornberg, who some of us have studied in Torah study sometimes, who tends to take sort of a psychoanalytical approach to Torah, which is great, and really pulls people's personalities out. And she says, what must this have been like for Moses? Moses did all this stuff, and then God says to him, I want you to go get your brother, and I want you to go put him in the fanciest clothes you can find. Aaron hasn't really done much, right? I mean, Aaron, not yet, but Aaron's about to really mess up with the golden calf, right? So Aaron's not like our key leader here, but Aaron gets to have the children of Aaron get to have fancy clothes, handmade with gold. Aaron gets fancy clothes, right? So in the Torah portion, it explains Aaron gets clothes that are twice as fancy as his children, and that Aaron should be this sort of royal figure. And Zornberg's comment is, that must hurt Moses from deep within. Like, I did all this stuff for you, and now you're going to give the clothes to him? How come he gets the award when I'm the one who has been doing all the work? Her answer is that this is actually not about Aaron at all. This was a lesson for Moses, that sometimes when we've become powerful, when we've become leaders, when we stand at the pinnacle of whatever it is whatever mountain we've been climbing, we need a reminder that it's not all about us. That Moses didn't need a reward. Moses needed a reminder of the other human beings that he needed to see, to be humbled, because Moses had had plenty on his resume that made him proud. And people knew he was a leader. He needed to see in other people that there was leadership out there. And it's a great Jewish value that I think, in my mind, is relatively universal throughout our tradition, that Jewish leadership is not defined by how we hold power, but rather by how we share power. And there are examples throughout Torah and throughout rabbinic writings of even when we had kings and they sat on a throne, they were supposed to sit on a throne holding the Torah so that they would be at all times. They couldn't put it down. So you sit on a throne, you got your crown, you're in charge of the whole kingdom, but you hold that Torah because remember, it's not only about you. You don't have all the power. There is something more powerful than you. When we walk into sanctuaries today, many sanctuaries, not ours, but many sanctuaries have the phrase, Da lifnei ata omed, above the ark, which says, know before whom you stand. And you can interpret it a few different ways, but generally speaking, it's remember that this isn't all about you, that there are greater powers and other beings in this universe, and know where you fit into the puzzle. Don't think that you're in charge of this world. And I would argue that even God gets humbled many times. Abraham argues, tells God, Sodom and Gomorrah, and you can't destroy everybody. Moses talks back and forth. Jacob, we say, wrestles with God. So it's a common theme throughout Torah. The rabbis, when they write the Talmud, get a little more specific. They like to give us images, stories. They say, one of my favorites, which I'm sure I've said many times, is that everybody has to have two pockets and a note in each pocket. One that says the world was created for you, and one that says you're nothing but dust and ashes. So when you're feeling when you're feeling like Moses, at least in this moment that we're talking about, and you think you've done everything you could do, and you're patting yourself on the back, you reach into the pocket that says, remember, you're nothing but dust and ashes. You're like, we would say, everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time, right? That you're like everybody else. Everybody returns to the earth in the same way, and nobody gets any better seat than anybody else just because you accomplished something. And when you're feeling low and like nobody knows you exist, pull out the other note that says, hey, the world was created for you. This is your world to do something with. So Judaism doesn't seem to like power in this vacuum, that leaders would be on their own. It seems to want us to remember when we're strong, remember that we're still human. When we're weak, remember that you have superhuman powers sometimes. And generally, that we should share those things with other people, that we don't hold them to ourselves. There were two reminders this week that came up in different discussions and podcasts I was listening to. One was a story by this, hopefully I'll get her name right, Yana Krupnikov, who's a political scientist at Stony Brook University. She was being interviewed on Hidden Brain, for those who listen to Hidden Brain. And she was on a flight with her husband and her 1.5-year-old child. She gives this example. She studies the political divide in our country, how we seem to separate into our categories. And so she's telling a story. She says she was on a plane, and it's a 7-hour flight, and her 1.5-year-old daughter is being a 1.5-year-old, and there's this woman across the aisle who's giving her this evil stare. Every time her daughter screams on the plane or cries or does whatever a 1.5-year-old does on a plane, she feels she's getting this terrible stare from this woman. And it's driving her nuts. She thinks the woman's rude. She thinks she's doing everything right. She's judging her own parenting. And so what does she do? She takes her phone out. She pays some obnoxious fee to get internet on the flight so that she can go on Twitter and say, is it rude for my baby to be crying on a plane, right? She types it in. She's asking the world, right? And she gets all these responses. All these people, absolutely not. You be a good mother. You're fine. Babies cry on planes. People need to get over it. And she gets all this positive feedback. She gets off the plane. They get to their destination. she tugs her husband on the shoulder. Weren't you bothered by that woman who was staring at us the whole time? He says, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see anything. Her point is, she says, in our world today, we take out these devices. I know we blame a lot on devices. We take out these devices, and it allows us to get into a room, no matter where we are, even if we're on a plane over the Atlantic Ocean. I can get into a room with people who will tell me exactly what I want to hear. All she wanted to hear was, you are a good mother. There's nothing wrong with your kid. Let your kid cry. It's fine. But she didn't ask anybody on the plane that. Maybe the people on the plane would have had a different opinion. Meanwhile, her husband didn't even notice the whole thing. So, that's possible. There was on my ride to temple this morning, similarly, I was listening to the Daily Show's comment on yesterday's AT&T outage. And they had a great little comedy sketch about what it must be like, how wonderful, this guy made up this story, how wonderful it would be, how wonderful it was, pretending, that his phone wasn't working yesterday. He woke up and got on the subway and phone wasn't working, so he was forced to talk to the people next to him on the subway. And he made a friend, and then they went to Central Park, and then they had the time of their life. And they had this great time, and then all of a sudden his phone turned back on and he forgot that anybody was there, right? But the point is that this is part, I think, of what Torah is trying to push us. Push Moses in this case, but push us. The rabbis are trying to push us. Don't think of yourself in isolation, even when you're leading. So I share all of this because tonight we're celebrating our small groups. We decided to do this 6 months, a year ago, I don't know, a long time ago. So we need to celebrate our small groups. Why? Because 6 years ago, we had a strategic plan. We brought in Ron Wolfson, this great scholar and speaker, many of you remember. And one of the pieces of wisdom that Ron left with us was to start small groups. So then we had a bunch of meetings about what we could call them that would make them interesting, and we landed on small groups, which works. Ron writes in his book, the lifeblood of the synagogue of the 21st century is small groups that members join to explore an interest or pursue a purpose. Whereas 20th century synagogues already had a number of small groups, but we called them boards and committees. And the agendas of those groups were always corporate. Important, but corporate, to do the business of the congregation. Imagine, he said, if instead of running a business, the small groups fostered friendship as the bedrock of the community. Imagine if instead of looking at a synagogue as a corporation, small groups personalized the synagogue by enabling members to connect in a meaningful way. Imagine if in place of meetings to talk about numbers, small groups met to encourage personal growth, because the truth is spiritual growth often happens not in a large crowd, but in a small, intimate, and supportive setting where you feel you can be yourself. So 6 years ago, we learned that our synagogue wouldn't succeed due to clergy and board and committee leadership alone, even though that's what helped us succeed for the century and a half that preceded these years. We decided to broaden our leadership, to cast a broader net, to welcome more people in, to allow people to run free in a way within our playground. And so tonight we celebrate the achievements and the partnership that those people who stepped forward have created, the way in which they have, let's say, dressed up our synagogue with new groups, new ideas, new opportunities for people to engage, and aren't talking about numbers or dollars or business. And we mention it because this initiative is not over. We invite you to continue to create small groups. They've been overwhelmingly successful. A small group, for a reminder, refresher, requires just two things. One, it requires a person with a good idea. You get to be the judge if it's a good idea or not. And two, it requires 3 people to join you. A good idea and 3 people, and you start something new at our synagogue.